Hello, Namaskar, Vanakkam. Death Be Not Proud. This is a sonnet written by John Donne. Uh, Not a very long poem, obviously, because it's of 14 lines, as all sonnets are. But this deals with a very important topic, a rather complex topic like death. And how should death be dealt with? That's essentially what this poem or sonnet talks about. So let's get into what exactly this is about, and then we will get into the text of the poem. I will start with the themes of the poem so that it becomes easier for you to place it in context. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so death be not proud, part of your Prism textbook. Now, this is an image I created. Now, you can see, I mean, when I wrote death, these are the kind of images that it provided me with skulls showing in the backdrop. John Donne did have a beard, but not exactly looking like this. Now, John Donne was known for his deeply emotional poetry, and you will realize it while we are going through the explanation of this particular poem. So he was known for his deeply emotional poetry. This is a word that you should use in your answers. There he explored themes of mortality, which to do with death, how death should be looked at. So he's therefore considered what are called the metaphysical poets, talking about slightly abstract kind of themes. And your reaction, the human reaction to something like death, because death is complex, death is mysterious. It is something which you don't know. It is the area of the unknown. You don't know what happens after you are no more, right? So he explores those kind of themes, and that makes him one of the most prominent metaphysical poets. So this particular poem belongs to the genre of metaphysical poetry. So he was also, interestingly, and that is something which comes quite prominently in this particular poem, he was also a Christian cleric. Cleric means, one of the priests in Christianity. So you can see Christianity's influence pretty much in this particular poem. So in terms of the style, it is a 14-line Petrarchan sonnet. It was written in 1609, but published only in 1633. It is known as Sonnet 10, and it is one of John Donne's 19 holy sonnets. And in this poem, it is as if the poet is having a conversation with death. So death in pretty much has been personified in this particular poem. What are the themes of the poem? The central theme is a challenge to the power of death. That is death really so powerful? We are all scared of death. What will happen if I die tomorrow, right? So we are all very scared of death because it is something which you are not really prepared for. You think you're going to live forever. So you are not prepared for a situation where you come face to face with the death, especially when people are told that, oh, you have this terminal illness, you would survive only for the next 6 months to a year and stuff like that, very tragic circumstances. So you're not prepared mentally for it. Here, John Donne is challenging the power and the finality of death. So please make a note of the lines that I've written out here, because you should use them in your answers, okay? Especially in the 5-mark and the 10-mark questions, because the speaker is directly addressing the death as a person, and he's mocking it. It's almost like the way we mock someone we don't like particularly. So he's mocking the pride of death and telling, you don't really have that kind of power. So it also explores the potential for an afterlife, and that is something to do again with Christianity. The second point, more or less the same. He's defying the power of death. He argues that death is not invincible. It is not a finality. It is portrayed as a mere inconvenience, a sleep that precedes an eternal awakening. It's almost like sleeping. We sleep at that time, we are in an unconscious state. Death is pretty much like that. So it talks about the limitations of death and downplays death's significance by listing other forces that can cause death, making it seem like less like a singular all-powerful entity. Death is not the finality. He compares it with X, Y, and Z to say that, there is not much of a difference. So he's kind of mocking it, underplaying its importance. The immortality of the soul, the speaker, this is another theme, that the speaker suggests that death can only touch the body. The body, it's pretty similar to what we say even in Hinduism, right? That The body is what is mortal, the soul is immortal. So he also means to say that soul transcends it and achieves a higher state of existence. So please make note of all these three theme points, right? I will be putting it as notes. I will tell you where, and you can make use of that. This is another image which is there in the thumbnail as well, again to show that he's talking about writing about death. Now, briefly about the title before we get into the text of the poem explanation. It is like addressing death straight, asking it not to be proud. This immediately establishes a confrontation. Death, be not proud. He's addressing it. He's addressing death, do not be proud. Okay, we tell someone, no, hey, come on, don't be so proud of yourself. Similarly, he's telling death, be not proud. So it is like addressing death straight, asking it not to be proud. So it establishes a confrontational tone. You know, the tone is confrontational. It's not you can think of it as an advice, but the advice is not really worded in a very polite kind of manner, right? So it challenges the speaker. It's throwing a challenge at the speaker, at death. Proud suggests that death sees itself as powerful. Okay. So the challenge tries to diminish its dominance, the dominance that death seems to have. And by denying death this pride, that don't be proud, the poem is hinting at a subversion of the usual power dynamic. We think, what I mean by that is, see, I write good language out here so that it's, you can use these words and phrases. Unlike, see, it's very easy for me to Hindi में explain करके कुछ भी बोल के चले जाओ. इस तरह से मैं समझाऊंगा तो तुमको कोई फायदा नहीं होगा, क्योंकि इन सभी किसी भी शब्द का आप इस्तेमाल अपने आंसर्स में नहीं कर सकते हैं. करेक्ट ना? इंग्लिश में लिखने का और समझाने का फायदा ये है that you can use this good language in your 5 mark and 10 mark answers and impress the examiner with that language and get more marks. Samjhe? That's all. So what you need to do is to use phrases like subversion of the usual power dynamic. What does it mean? And I will explain that. The usual power dynamic is that death is more powerful than me, because death can put a full stop to my life. That is the power equation. You are more powerful than me. Now he's telling death, no, you are not more powerful than me. You are just ordinary. So he's subverting, he's inverting the usual dynamic, the equation of power. Understood? The title is also geared to grab attention immediately of the reader. Why is he saying death be not proud? So the challenge that he's posing to death, personifying it, it kind of makes us question, okay, correct. What he's saying is correct. We don't need to be so scared of death. And there is no reason for death to be proud of itself. So it also tells us the theme of the poem, that it's talking about death. And it is also interesting that it has been given an interesting human emotion like pride, which is pretty much universal, right? So there is some kind of an irony in this. Death, you don't normally associate death with something like life. You can be proud. No, she's very beautiful. She's very beautiful and she's very proud of her beauty. He's very proud because he is very good looking, muscular, etc. So he's very proud of his fitness regimen, right? But we don't associate that with someone which is something which is dead. We may associate with someone living, not with death. Now let's get to the text of the poem. I hope yahan tak you have understood, and I've managed to kind of put you in that frame of mind where you will find it easier to understand the poem. Okay. So there are 14 lines. I will do 2 lines at a time so that it's easy. Death be not proud, though some have called thee mighty and dreadful, for thou art not so. Straight away, he's telling them rubbishing death. In the first 2 lines itself, he's saying, do not be proud, straight away, what I explained there. But even though some people have called you mighty and dreadful, okay, you have been called mighty and dreadful, which means powerful and a very frightening force. Mighty, which conveys powerful. Dreadful means something of a frightening force. People have called thee. Thee means you. You refers to death. So death, do not be proud, even though some people have called you powerful and a very frightening force, because for means because you are not so. Thou art not so. So he's basically refuting the power of death. So he's also introducing the central theme of the poem. and it's establishing the poet on an equal footing with death. You are not more powerful than me, and it kind of also motivates the reader, like you and me, to question our own concepts and ideas of death. So it's undermine the stature of death. Undermine, it's a good phrase to use. Undermine the stature of death. Line 3 and 4. For those whom thou thinkest thou those overthrew, die not, poor death, nor yet can thou kill me. So he's saying, again, he's mocking death, saying that, you think that you cause the downfall of people. Overthrow means you cause the downfall of people. That's the impression you are under. You is who? Death. Okay. Thou thinkest. Thou thinkest means that the poet thinks that death is mistaken. You think like this, but you are actually mistaken. So he's telling death that it does not truly defeat or overthrow, bring about the downfall of people who he thinks it is doing that too. Death is thinking that it is bringing about the downfall of X, Y, and Z people. But he's telling death, no, you do not. You seem to be under the impression, thou thinkest that you do, but actually you do not. So the fourth line, die not, poor death, nor yet can you kill me. So he's saying that when someone dies, it is not them who is truly dying, but rather death itself. Death itself is dying, not the person, because death has not achieved a complete victory. So he's telling death not to die, while also mocking it by calling it a very poor and a very pitiable kind of death. Poor death, something which is pitiable, something on which you need to take pity. So he's saying that you don't need to die. So he's portraying it as a very powerless kind of an entity, because you cannot kill me. You are not so powerful. You are actually a very poor death. So not yet canst thou kill me is a direct challenge once again to death. It's denying its ability to truly kill the speaker, that you cannot completely eliminate me. So he's kind of leading you on to the whole concept of afterlife, that the soul lives after death is there. So you're not killing me completely, because my soul is going to continue to live after I am dead. So it kind of introduces us in a very subtle way to the poet's concept of afterlife. What I told you, that he was a Christian, but that the poet, it also probably conveys that the poet is prepared to face death without any kind of fear. From rest and sleep, which but thy pictures be, much pleasure then from thee much more must flow. So lines 5 and 6 convey that death is compared to rest and sleep. Okay, death is now compared to rest and sleep. When we are sleeping, what I told you in the introduction, we are almost in an unconscious state. It's almost as if we could well be dead, or when we are in a state of rest. Now, both are pleasant experiences. Both resting and sleeping, obviously, we find them to be extremely pleasant experiences. The word pictures suggests that picture is what? You take a photograph, you're capturing something, right? So what the picture is, it's like an imitation of the real self, right? So what he's saying is that death is just an imitation of these two states, that is of rest and sleep. Much pleasure then from thee much more must flow. So he's saying that since sleep brings a lot of pleasure, just like rest, death is also a deep form of rest or sleep. So death also must actually bring more pleasure. That more pleasure should flow from death, because death is also a form of sleep or rest. Okay, so by comparing death to sleep, which is pretty much a daily activity, all of us do sleep every day, the poet is actually downplaying the fearsome nature of death. So just as we enjoy sleeping for 7 to 8 hours in a day, even death could be something similar. And death, so now it no longer looks like an ending, because after sleep, you obviously get up after 6 to 7 to 8 hours, right? Similarly, death no longer seems like a full stop. It no longer looks like a permanent ending. It just seems like a deeper form of rest. Please remember this, a deeper form of rest, and that makes it obviously less frightening. And soonest our best men with thee do go, rest of their bones and souls delivery. Now, this is an important line. This is something which you can expect in the examination to explain. So the seventh line, and soonest our best men with thee do go, is a pointer that death at a very young age of the good men or the best men happens. You know, sometimes people die very young, and soonest our best men with thee do go, that they go with you. Go with you means that they go with death. So they are the first ones to embrace death. Rest of their bones, physical death brings death to the body, right? However, soul's delivery means death liberates the soul from the constraints, from the limitations, from the boundaries of the physical world. Okay, so soul is delivered. It is let free from the limitations, from the constraints, from the boundaries of the physical world, whereas the physical body is provided rest as a result of death. Okay, it provides rest to the bone. So the poet is suggesting that good people are not punished by dying young. It's actually some kind of a solace to the young people who die young. It is a blessing of sorts because it offers them both rest to the young people, to the best people. It offers them rest to the physical body, and it offers them liberation to the soul. So there is some kind of a comfort in mortality, that even in death, you know, there is actually, so he's basically, what he's doing is making you look at death in a very positive kind of a light. You understand? So the emphasis on soul's delivery reinforces the poem's theme of defiance of death. To say that true death is not the end of the soul, it's actually its freedom. It's actually its liberation. So he's trying to make you look at death in a very different way, instead of looking at it something as a very morbid kind of a development. So the point being made is that one does not need to fear death, particularly if you have led a good life. If you have led a good life, there's really no need to fear death. And death, because death finally offers rest for the body, that is the bones, and liberation, delivery for the soul. In Christianity also, death is seen as a release from the suffering on earth, and the soul's delivery, the phrase soul's delivery, it kind of aligns with that thought. Thou art slave to fate, chance, kings, and desperate men, but those with poison, war, and sickness dwell. So line 9th personifies death now as a slave. That thou art, thou is you, that is death. You are, this is are. You are a slave to fate. That is, you are controlled by various forces like fate, which means unpredictable events. Anything could happen at any time, you know, you don't know. So you are actually, death is a slave. Death will come only if fate intervenes, some kind of an unpredictable event happens. So you actually are a slave to fate. Chance means random things beyond anyone's control. You know, something may happen just by chance. So it is something beyond your control, including yours. Kings is a reference. It's denoting powerful men who can either inflict death upon others, either in a war, or can order someone's execution. So the king decides that, okay, this person will be killed. He will be executed. So you are a slave even to the decision of that powerful person called the king. And desperate men. Desperate men is a reference to people who do extreme measures, who take extreme measures, either killing themselves, suicide, or indulging in violence and killing other people. Okay. And those with poison, war, and sickness dwell. So the 10th line associates death now with negative things. Here he is talking about him as death as a slave. Here it is associating death with negative things like poison, war, and sickness. So he's talking about poison is what? He's talking about slow death. War means a violent death. Okay. And sickness means a very painful death. You know, you're suffering from some disease, and that makes the process of death rather painful. So slow death, violent death, and a painful death. So all negative influences. So he's associating death with all these negative and unpleasant comparisons or companions, which are destructive in nature. So these lines, these two lines, line 9 and 10, are in a way talking about the diminishing power of death. That death is not the very powerful force that we usually associate it with. So by calling death as a slave, the speaker is kind of, the poet is kind of saying you don't have the authority. You do not have any kind of authority. You are just a tool which is used by other forces like fate, by chance, by kings and desperate men. And then in the 10th line, by linking death to unpleasant things, the poet is further diminishing its appeal. So the end message that John Donne is trying to convey is that death is not such a powerful master, but it is a rather dependent servant to fate, to chance, to kings, and to desperate men. And its association with unpleasant things like poison, war, and sickness, it kind of further diminishes its perceived glory. We think, oh, death is something big and powerful and glorious. It's saying, no, it's actually a slave. It is associated with all these unpleasant companions. And poppy or charms can make us sleep as well, and better than thy stroke, why swellest thou then? So again, continuing the same thing where he's continuing to diminish the importance of death. So he's now introducing alternatives to death. That death is not the only one. There can be alternatives which can also induce a state of sleep. So he refers to poppy, which means opium, known for its sleep-inducing properties. Charms are magical spells which can also induce sleep depending on the nature of the charm. This is opium. This is a reference to some kind of magic or hypnotization. And better than thy stroke, the speaker, the John Donne here, he's arguing that sleep which is induced by these properties like use of opium or magic as alternatives is actually even better than the sleep which is brought about by death. And because this will be a very painless kind of experience, in fact, quite pleasant kind of experience. So he's saying they are better than your stroke. So why do you feel so proud? What is it that you are so arrogant and proud about? Because there are other ways to achieve a similar state of complete, blissful, unconscious kind of state where you're not aware of what is happening around you. So where is the need for death to take such pride in its power? Okay, so he's questioning what? He's questioning the uniqueness of death. What is it that makes you so unique? I don't think you're so important. So he's trying to lessen its importance. And he's also questioning the value of death, because if other methods can provide you with a better quality of sleep than death, or at least similar, that death itself offers no real benefit. It becomes a less attractive kind of an option. Okay, though I would think that death is not something which is offering you an option. Sleep, there is an option, whether you choose to sleep or not, whether you choose to go under the magical spell or not. That's a thought that came to me while I was, preparing for this particular poem. One short sleep past, we wake eternally. Now that can be the alternate view in case if you get a question like that. And death shall be no more, death thou shalt die. Now this is the real confrontation kind of a line. So he's saying that there is victory over death and the promise of an afterlife. So one short sleep past is death is compared to a short sleep, okay, which is a temporary state which is quickly overcome. Short means it is impermanent, it is temporary, it is not something which is there all the time. It's just a short sleep, and then we will wake up eternally. Okay, after the sleep of death, there will be an awakening, and it is eternal. This suggests it is basically suggestive of an afterlife. That there will be an afterlife. So it is just a short sleep, no big deal, and death shall be no more. So he's saying that death itself, we say that, oh, he is no more, she is no more. He's saying that death shall be no more, that death itself is a temporary state of sleep. So he's saying that death itself will cease to exist, and with everyone experiencing eternal life in the form of an afterlife, death really has no purpose and it is vanquished. Death itself shall die. It shall be no more. So death, thou shalt die is a very, very powerful line, because it is reversing the title. Earlier he said, the death be not proud. He's saying now he has turned it and got even more aggressive by the last line. And he's saying, death, thou shalt die. So earlier it was referred to as proud and mighty, right? And frightening force. Now death itself faces its own death. Death itself faces its own demise, its own ending. So the concluding lines reinforce the central theme of the poem, which is to defy the power of death and the belief of an afterlife, which is what I said. I'm just kind of doing a recap. And by talking of death as a short sleep followed by an eternal awakening, it is presenting death only as a transitional phase. As a transitional phase, it is not a full stop, it is not an ending. So that death is not defeated, it's almost like destroyed. Thou shalt die. So it is kind of reinforcing the complete triumph of the poet over the fear of death. That I am no longer scared of death because you're just a short sleep and you yourself will die. So where is the need for me to be scared of you? Where is the need for me to be fearful of you? So the concept of death itself dying actually could be seen as a reference to a biblical passage in the Corinthians, okay, where death is described as being swallowed up by victory. It's one of the books. So death itself is described as being swallowed up by victory, which is why his own Christian beliefs have come into this particular poem. So first half, just to do a second recap, as I say, I know the way I teach, I'll teach you, I'll do a revision, a second revision, so that it kind of registers in your mind that much more strongly. He's debunking the belief that death is a victor. No, you're not a victor, so there's no reason for you to be proud. You cannot kill me. And it's basically a rest for my tired body, for my bones. And it's actually giving soul's delivery, freeing up my soul to heaven. And then in the second half of the poem, he's completely critical of death's proud posturing. It's saying that you cannot even choose your victim. You must only, you are a slave to fate and kings, etc. and chance, that you are dependent on them. And you cannot decide on your own. I hope the poem, I think I've explained very well, very thoroughly. Let's look at the literary devices quickly. One is apostrophe. The entire poem is directly addressed to death, which is a personification concept. So it creates a sense of intimacy and allows the speaker, the poet in this case, to confront death directly. It is given human qualities like pride, dreadfulness, even the ability to swell and slay, die, being a slave. So death in that sense becomes a more relatable target for the poet's arguments. Then there is a paradox, because the title itself is a paradox, because death is usually associated with pride, but here the poem is saying you don't need to be proud. So the paradoxes include the idea of death itself dying, which is very strange. You don't normally talk like that, right? And sleep being a better version of death. So these kind of paradoxes which are there in the poem, they create a sense of surprise for the reader. Then there's the use of metaphor, where death is compared to different things throughout the poem: sleep, slave, a picture. So they kind of diminish the power of death and again make it easier for us to relate to it, because when you compare it with a photograph, it's more easy for us to relate to it. Repetition of the power death, easy. Allusion to biblical passages, the imagery of death as a slave and the imagery of sleep. And this is the rhyme scheme of the poem. ABBA, you can check with this, with the text of the poem. So with this, we come to the end of this particular poem's explanation. I hope it is pretty clear. It's a short poem, but you need to kind of, with the help of the notes that I've given you, ensure that you use those kind of good phrases and words, because that will put you at an advantage over anyone else who is not getting this, so that you are able to do much better than the others. When you use this kind of better quality vocabulary, it obviously elevates the quality of your answers. And that's what we all are here for, aren't we? So thank you very much for watching. God bless you. Namaskar.